So for this video, I thought that I might as well talk about something I think is really interesting. So first off, if you have any video ideas, first off before I start, if you have any video ideas, please let me know down in the comments below. Videos you want me to make, a specific topic or review videos, anything, because I really do think I'm kind of like running out of content when it comes to the carnivore stuff. But there are some like very nuanced things that I believe I haven't covered, and this is actually one of them. So somebody asked me a question. It's very, very interesting comment, actually. So he says, what do you think about carbs in development? So it creates an insulin response that shortly after it makes IGF-1 more effective. I think that if you are in puberty, you should eat carbs, especially because carbs create that high insulin response to grow taller and have more bone density. But after puberty, stop eating carbs. Please, I really want to see your opinion, so please respond, right? And I look at that and I go, wow, okay. In fact, I will make a video about this on my thoughts on how exactly this works and all that stuff. So here's what I think. I usually, this is going to sound crazy, I usually actually disagree with a lot of eating carb stuff, but this is one instance where I actually kind of agree. Not quite. I agree with the thought process, but I don't necessarily agree with the implementation. So he's basically saying, how do I, like, if I were in puberty, right, how would I increase my growth? How exactly would I do that? Well, this is really important because this is actually something I plan on doing with my child in the future, so I might as well just say as is. How exactly, like, I always talk about this nutrition stuff, right? How am I going to make my child grow up to be tall? How am I going to make my child to grow up and be attractive? And all this stuff. So I'll cover all of it. I'll cover both the height aspect as well as the facial attractiveness aspect. Okay, so first off, let's start off with the height aspect. So how would I increase my child's height to make sure that he grows up correctly? Well, there are a couple main things. I would not add carbs, but I would add something else. So I wouldn't add the direct form of carbs. I would call it the direct form of carbs. So by carbs, when he says carbs in this case, I assume he means like potatoes, right? Like potatoes, rice, something like that, right? I do not agree with that. I actually think that you should be adding milk, but there is a caveat here. Just because you add milk and just because you eat meat, and let's say you were to add milk, eat meat, and do all that stuff, right? I don't necessarily fully think that means that you are going to suddenly just grow up tall. Growing up tall comes with a little bit more. So this is just, once again, this is how I view everything, or a lot of things anyways, by the body. So the body is always looking to adapt. And that means it will adapt to its environment in that specific situation. So why is that important? What does that mean? So in this case, this means that if the body is not incentivized to become taller for some reason or another, it will not become taller. And how does the body know whether or not it is or isn't incentivized? So I talked about before exercise. I believe exercise is not really healthy after puberty. I didn't necessarily specify that, but I will say that. So I don't necessarily believe that exercise is necessary after you grow up. After puberty, you don't really need exercise. That's what my thought anyways. I made a whole video on that. If you're really interested, go check that out. So I think that exercise, however, is essential during when the child is growing up. And I think there are a couple of indicators to this in order to see this. One of which I think is just children being incredibly, I guess you could say, out of control. They want to move around. They always want to move around. They always want to be playing. They always want to be doing all that, right? I think their body naturally knows what it wants to do. So let their body do what they want to do, right? If they want to run around, if they want to jump and do all this stuff, right? I think all that is it's incentivizing tissue remodeling in this case. And like I said before, I believe tissue remodeling for the most part to be quite not helpful. But we do have a specific situation here. Tissue remodeling is not just happening in somebody who does not have the ability to grow. Tissue remodeling is happening or occurring in this case for a child who is able to grow. So that means that the child benefits from the exercise, because the exercise causes the bones and the muscles to increase, but they are not just increasing temporarily, they're increasing permanently because they're going through puberty, because they're growing up literally during adolescence, right? There's a set period of time they're allowed to grow. So doing this tissue remodeling during this time allows for that child to basically grow permanently. And there's a set period of time which they can grow permanently to adapt to their environment in this case. So you would incentivize the child to, right, if he wants to run around, if he wants to play basketball, if he wants to do whatever during that time, right, you would incentivize that, you would allow that, but you wouldn't add carbohydrates. So I would still say go basically full carnivore for the most part, but there is one catch. You would add a lot more milk than usual. So you would let them drink as much milk as they want. Once again, in my opinion, not pasteurized milk. So that's really, really important. Not pasteurized milk, basically full carnivore, and incentivizing exercise. Those are the three main things I believe are really important for their height development. Actually, let me specify that real quick. So this also comes with other things. So you would, when I say exercise in this case, I mean exercise when it comes to the legs. So if you want their legs, for instance, to be developed or more developed and them to grow taller, then you would want exercises pertaining to that. So that could be jumping, as an example. If they're jumping, if they're maybe running, that sort of stuff. That's really, really important for the child. Also, I should say, this isn't really too related to it, but another thing for the child, I believe, is during sleep, not sleeping with pajamas. Now, people might say, what the hell does that have to do with anything? It has to do with the fact that when you're sleeping with pajamas, you are basically heating up this is for men especially, you are heating up the testicles, and in this case, this causes them to be less effective. The testicles are outside of the body for a reason. So yeah, that's really important, but not quite related to exercise. But I still think it's important because I believe that's helps a lot with the development of the size of the D. Yes. Speaking on that from personal experience, I will say I'm very thankful for my dad that he knows that at least that much about medicine and human anatomy, because that definitely is, I think that is very, very helpful, but not quite necessarily important in this case. So that's the first thing. Now you might say, okay, let's say I want them to have a perfect body, right? Let's say I want my child to have the perfect body. What would I do? So in that case, then I would say, okay, incentivize basically every sort of exercise. So this doesn't just include, by the way, jumping or running. This includes throwing. This is not something I've talked about, but the big difference basically between humans and apes is humans are able to throw very well, and this is what allows for the shoulders to grow out larger. So that's why the shoulders grow out larger. So I guess you could say probably one of the really good exercises you could do for that is javelin throwing. That's not really an exercise. So you'd say, okay, what replaces javelin throwing, right? Because that's the ancient exercise. The current exercise for that is baseball. So if you really, really want to develop this a bit more, then you want to probably be developing baseball a bit. You probably, I would also say, any sort of exercise or any sort of movement that forces the rotation of the shoulders a lot more, which is basically baseball. You could also say swimming, but swimming's a little bit different. But I do believe swimmers have very, very well developed bodies, so that could be another example. So yeah. Anyways, that's just for the body part. Now, what about the face part? So that's part one. This is part two. So how exactly would I develop the child's face? So my child's face, anyways. What would I do? So there are a couple things. First off, like I said before, it's all about tissue remodeling. The body is only going to adapt if it needs to adapt. If it doesn't need to adapt, it's not going to adapt. So this is going to sound messy, and that's because it is. But I believe that this is sort of necessary. when people eat in modern society today, I don't know if you've noticed, they use forks and knives, right? So they use cutlery. I don't necessarily believe that's important. You can eat with cutlery, and it's much less messy, in my opinion. I personally would rather eat with cutlery. But if I could not eat with cutlery, then what would that force me to do? Well, if I couldn't eat with cutlery, I would have to grab whatever piece of meat. Let's say they pre-cut the meat for me at the very least, right? So I would grab this giant like hunk of meat, this ribeye or whatever, and I would pull and chew like this. I would use the front incisors. That's super important, I believe, for children, and that's because if they are not using the front incisors, their teeth will not fully develop correctly, and in this case, their teeth will be a little bit maloccluded. It won't be straight. Not only will it not be straight, the palate won't expand as much. So I think that's another thing that's really important. I am not entirely sure, but I think children naturally know how to drink water correctly. And this has to do with facial development again, because if you drink water in giant gulps, you're not drinking it correctly. If you drink it, I don't really know how to explain it besides like demonstrating. But when you drink water, you're not supposed to. I'll just try to show an example. And this is for children, because if children are drinking water incorrectly, then I believe this really does affect their facial structure. So my facial structure, it isn't completely messed up. I would say my biggest weakness when it comes to my facial structure is I actually wasn't incentivized to use my incisors too much, if almost at all now that I think about it. I was never really incentivized to use my incisors. And as you can see, my incisors aren't necessarily this part of my face. My palate is expanded far better around this area here than it is the front area here. So because it's not expanded in the front area as much, this part doesn't puff out more in this case, and I don't have what's considered like high cheekbones, because the cheekbones aren't necessarily like protruding outwards as much. So I think that's really important. I don't necessarily know if you can see it too well. Yeah. So here, these are the incisors. That's a canine, but I think that's considered an incisor as well. So these teeth right here are the teeth that you're supposed to be using when you're taking a piece of meat and you're biting into it and you're chewing like this. Children have something called teething, if you haven't noticed, and I think teething is kind of like self-explanatory. What the child is looking to do when the child is feeling that teething thing, that's basically their body saying, help me develop my palate, in the future, and has to do with breathing. So first off, I should really explain how correct drinking water looks like. So you don't drink water like this. So you don't drink it super quickly. You drink it in these sort of gulps. You can't really see it because of my beard, but you drink it in these kind of gulps where your tongue will hit the back of the roof of the mouth. I don't know how you can necessarily monitor that for your child, but you could just like tell them. You could try to get them to feel the correct way, because they're not necessarily super developed yet. They're not used to a certain pattern because they're really developed early, right? So you might be able to change it because they don't necessarily have this pattern fully developed yet. So the correct version should be something like this. I got a little stuck down the windpipe, but you get the general idea. So, yeah, I think that's super important. So, yeah, when it comes to the child's development, first off, I think milk, essential. Second, meat. And third, exercise. Those are the three things in order for that child to develop attractively. Attractively, I'm going to specify that. attractively. Just because just because they develop attractively doesn't necessarily mean they'll develop correctly in other ways. So there's a lot of examples of this. I would say actors could be an example, right? Where if you look at a lot of these actors, they're actually pretty short, and they're not really that tall. And in fact, it's actually incentivized for an actor to not necessarily be that tall. And the reason is because whenever they do these shots, they're supposed to be like at head level, right? But if they're actually taller, right, it looks like this. So the shot looks really weird if they're trying to portray something of like equality or something of like we're on even field while we're talking, right? It's a movie director thing, but that's not really super important. But I think they're very good examples of not fully developing correctly. So their examples of developing correctly are the fact that their faces are usually developed well, but their bodies are not necessarily developed as well. That's one thing. I would also say certain organs I think develop better given certain conditions. So I think maybe the heart, the brain, the gallbladder, any of these organs that really, really, really like rely a little bit more on fat. If you're eating a lot of fat as you're growing up, I believe the gallbladder will adjust accordingly. If you don't, then it won't, right? Yeah. So I think I've pretty much covered everything. Yeah, I think I have. Yeah, for the most part, pretty much the way. Oh, I guess I should just be specific about the chewing part. So, yes, I don't believe that the children or the adolescents, whoever is basically growing and going through puberty, should be using any sort of fork or knife. They should be using their hands. So that's number one. They should be using their hands every single time they eat food. Second, when they're chewing food initially, they have to be chewing with the incisors in order to rip the food off and then to get enough food, enough of a chunk, I guess you could say. And once they get that chunk, then they use the back teeth here, the molars. Those. So, yeah, and that's actually a very interesting point, by the way, if you could just using me as a sort of example. If you look at my teeth, if you look at my bottom teeth, these teeth here are actually very, very well aligned. All of these teeth and at the back are very, very well aligned. But the front teeth are not as well aligned. And I believe, once again, that has to do with the fact that I was not incentivized to use my incisors, but I was always incentivized to use my molars, because when you eat with cutlery, what you're doing is you're taking a piece, you're doing the work of the incisors when you're using cutlery. That's basically what you're doing. So you're taking your piece, you're cutting it, and you're putting it in your mouth, and then you're chewing using these back teeth, but you're not ever using these front teeth. So, yeah, use all of the teeth. Basically, to keep it really short, it gets a little hard if you try to say this. To keep it really short, though, use whatever you want to incentivize to grow. So if you want something to be incentivized to grow, then use it more. But that's, once again, this is all during puberty, and this is all when you're younger. When you're older, when you get to a certain age that you can't really grow anymore, like me, right? Then you can't really do that. So that's just the way it is. You can't force that tissue remodeling, I believe, to be like that. You can incentivize some small tissue remodeling examples, like muscular tissue remodeling examples, but not actual, not much skeletal tissue remodeling examples. So yeah. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you guys found the video helpful or informative. It's all because of this comment right here. This comment right here basically says, what do you think? I'll try to make sure that everybody can see it. Once again, please give me video ideas. Just load this video with comments so I can read all of them and see like what other video ideas can I make, because I believe this comment was a really, really good idea, a really good video idea. So yeah, if you have any really like interesting sort of questions, I would say like it's this question has a lot of nuance, right? If you have any questions like this, uh, that's sort of difficult to say because it's a really nuanced question. You're not going to have nuanced questions too often. Um, but if you have any questions, any video ideas, any links, any specific people you want me to review, leave it down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys found the video helpful or informative. I'll see you in the next one.